Hello, and welcome back to the second episode of the TEPI podcast. If you're just finding this podcast for the first time, then welcome. This is a podcast that shares the stories of people working and learning towards peace in Northeast Asia. If you didn't already listen to the first episode with Zoom, then make sure to go check it out. In this episode, though, you'll hear from Lu Deting, who is a PhD student studying in the Human Rights and Peace Studies Department at Osaka Jogakuin University. Deting's research focuses on restoring the grassroots relationship between China and Japan through healing the wounds of Nanjing and Hiroshima. For those who might not be familiar with Nanjing or Hiroshima, Nanjing is a city in the eastern region of China that experienced a brutal massacre by Imperial Japanese troops during the Second Sino-Japanese War. And Hiroshima is a city in Japan that experienced the devastation of the first ever atomic bomb, which was dropped by the United States during the Pacific War in 1945. To learn more about these two cities and the experiences of the people who went through the massacre and the bombing, I suggest you check out the books The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang and Hiroshima by John Hershey. They might serve as a good launching pad into deeper readings about these places. But I think my super simplistic overview will be enough to give context to the conversation with Deting. A few other notes before we jump into the interview. Deting and I talked about NARPI, which is an abbreviation for Northeast Asia Regional Peacebuilding Institute, which is actually where Deting and I first met a few years ago. Deting also brings up the museum in Nanjing, which is a historical museum that serves as a memorial to the massacre that took place. And one last note, Deting mentions Tommy, who is a trauma and somatic healing facilitator who has been a resource for Deting while studying these traumatic histories. Hopefully that's enough background for this interview, so without further delay, here is Lu Deting. So Deting, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to jump in with the questions. So people may not know, but you're originally from Hangzhou, but now you're studying in Osaka. So could you just share a little bit about how you ended up living and studying in Japan, how you got there and what you're doing?
After I got graduated from my university in Hangzhou in China, I didn't know what I'm going to do. And I just want to get independent from my parents, and I want to grow up myself. So I'm thinking about going to another country, and Japan is very close to China, and it's not that expensive studying in Japan. So I am here.
I see. So before you decided to go to Japan and study, were you thinking anything about doing like peace-related or conflict-related study, or you were mainly focused on just getting out of China and trying to experience another country?
No, I don't have any ideas about what is peace, what is conflict, and I've never heard about this field. And I don't know there's those kind of courses in China, in Nanjing. So I was just want to be independent, kind of.
So right now, can you introduce your research briefly? What's the topic of your thesis?
It's like to reflect and to trust between the grassroots level of China and Japan, and through the historical trauma healing of Nanjing and Hiroshima. So it's very much about the historical trauma healing and the conflict transformation.
How did you end up choosing that topic, and why these two places? Why Nanjing and Hiroshima? What is the connection that you kind of saw with those two places when you were trying to pick a research topic?
It's like Nanjing and Hiroshima, basically, they both are the national victimhood of China and Japan. And unfortunately, they were kind of manipulated to promote the nationalistic or either patriotic educations in both countries. And second, now today they are international cities of peace, promoting peace, but they never or really touched upon the reconciliation processes. And about Nanjing, here in Japan, most of people, they don't know a lot about Nanjing, and frequently they were kind of denied by the right-wing extremists in Japan, and which means it is not widely known in Japan about Nanjing. And for Hiroshima, it's not very much covered in China, and so people do not have a lot of knowledge about Hiroshima. They only know the name Hiroshima, which was bombed and which ended the Second World War. And also, I think the third point is like I want to put these two victimized cities together to avoid one-side-only hatred during the processes, like the German and Polish, which is very much, one side is victim and one side is the perpetrator, which creates a lot of, kind of hatred towards one side. And I don't think it's a really good way for the reconciliation.
How did you kind of stumble upon this similarity, this kind of victimization, and this trauma history of both of these places? How did you kind of enter into that?
I think it's really the invitation from Professor Liu Chang of the Nanjing University. It happened in the 2019 in the summer of the NAPI training.
For people who maybe don't know what NARPI is or who Professor Liu Chang is, could you give a little background for what your experience there was and how that helped shape your ideas?
I think it's the first time that I closely touched upon this field, which is peace and conflict related issues. And before that, I was just reading a lot of paper materials about the peace, what is conflict, and I don't have practical ideas. But that summer, I went to Nanjing with a lot of Nabi friends, and we have a lot of, not just lectures, but we also have a lot of practical exercises, which helps me to know that we have ways like dialogues, like interactions with people, and we can learn from each other, and so as to build peace.
So it was there that you met Professor Liu Chang and talked about Nanjing and went to the museum for the first time and kind of saw this mutual victimization of both Nanjing and Hiroshima.
Yeah, and I've never known that there was Peace Institute for in China, and in which Professor Liu Chang was the director of the institute, and he was just like planning doing this kind of creating this book series about the international cities of peace, and I was just there, and yes, nobody's written about something about Japan, and I was in Japan, so he thought I would be the one who can help.
Yeah, that sounds like a good meeting. It sounds like he helped shape a lot of your kind of ideas about peace and these two places.
It's like, he has those kind of ideas because, as long as Nanjing was recognized as an international city of peace, we shouldn't only just focus on our own victimizations, but we also have to see others' pain, others' sufferings. And we can also learning from other cities, cities of peace, so as to work together. Because we shared the same goal, which is to make a world a better place to live for all. So this is the kind of stuff that inspired me to do something about Hiroshima. But like for Nanjing, it's like, to be honest, 2019 was the first time that I visited the museum. And I went to the museum and with a lot of people and all those cool pictures. And when you were inside the museum, you just feel like you cannot breathe well. And after the visiting, you just have those kind of bad feelings. and you don't know how to act. I mean, how to face those Japanese friends. It's really it's very natural that they are kind of hatred towards the Japanese. Even though the museum also shows like we have to remember the past, but not the hatred. But it's only words we don't know. They never taught us to how to react, how to transform those negative feelings. So like those kind of hatred or negative feelings are remembered maybe not by our heads, but by our body. So like the next time you met a Japanese, you would just, your body will tell you. And all those kind of images would just come up to you and you just do not know how to react. And I think for this part of the transformation, we need meditation or reflection. At least we need sometimes to reflect right after the visiting of the museum. But in reality, we don't have those kind of, processes. So I think a lot of people who visit those kind of national museums, they're always holding those kind of hatred unconsciously with their body. And those kind of hatred or sentiment will just be manipulated by some political leaders or whatever. And it's not going to help to reconcile or to restore the relationships between peoples. That's the part that I want to touch to.
That makes total sense. It's like this remembering when it's not done with reflection and with a kind of digesting the trauma that comes with that remembering. It can be used by kind of negative political actors or other institutions or kind of get misused. And so it becomes a source of more pain instead of a source of healing. So you saw that similarity that both these memories in Nanjing and these memories in Hiroshima were getting used in that kind of way?
Yeah, like for Nanjing is very much about the patriotic education, and for Hiroshima it's kind of a different, nationalistic education, which is, those kind of right-wing extremists. They are always trying to get rid of their negative past. I mean, the perpetration parts. And in order to get rid of the perpetration, they kind of to enlarge the victimhood, which is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is the way how Hiroshima was used to promote nationalistic education. And in another way, it's like Hiroshima was used to promote the Alliance for Peace, which is to promote the nuclear power inside the nation.
You kind of mentioned how remembering by itself is not enough, and you talked to kind of about conflict. And so I'm curious, how do you see in your research, what have you learned about the ways that historical trauma and guilt are connected with conflict transformation? You mentioned a little bit about like meditation, but I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to that a little bit more.
For me, in my research, the historical trauma is something that breaks our relationships, not just only between Chinese and Japanese, but also between men and women, and even the children and the parents. Those kind of relationships, they were all kind of ruined or destroyed by those kind of historical traumas, which is not yet healed. And like, if you have those kind of creating those kind of spaces and chances for people to gather together to share their stories, just a little bit related about those kind of historical events. This will help you to reflect and to realize that your identity or yourself, your family, or even the big relationships between the nations are deeply affected by those kind of traumas. And because, most of us just, we don't care about the history and they are not affecting us, the present. The past and the present don't have a lot of close relations. And we always neglect those part of historical facts, which I call the root cause of the conflict. And I think only after knowing that we are being affected, we are influenced by those traumas, those historical factors, that we are able to rebuild and to restart or to restore the relationships, which for me is the conflict transformation, to restore the relationship with the conflict transformation. So like the historical trauma is the root cause, and only when we touched upon this root cause, we healed our traumas together, then we can restore the relations and we can win back the trust in between groups of people.
I like how you touched on like the breaking down of relationships as the kind of outcome of this historical trauma. And you also mentioned before about it gets in our bodies and we may not even know. Like when you go to these museums, you see these images and it's in your body, even if you're not completely aware of it. I want to shift a little bit. You and I have talked before about our identities as part of the majority group in our home countries and kind of shifting from this international perspective into a more maybe domestic perspective, seeing these broken relationships between majority groups and minority groups and kind of thinking about conflict transformation within those groups and between those groups. How do you think we approach that type of conflict transformation or help create the safe space that people need to talk about these historical traumas and these guilts?
I think for those who are in the majority groups, we have to learn to know the past, to know that we have, inheriting those perpetration parts, and admit, not denial, and be honest to facing those kind of facts, which is very hard, but it's necessary to promote the processes. And also we have those kind of responsibilities to act, to create those to offer those kind of safe space or environment for those who come from the minority groups. It's not going to push them, but to make them feel safer, but to wait until they can talk and they want to share.
What are some things you think harm those conversations between those groups?
I think they are both the internal and external factors. Like for the external factors, for example, those kind of political disability, which is out of our control, and we might feel kind of powerless towards those kind of disability, but we can do something or make change about the internal facts. Like sometimes people in circles, they talk. If we don't aware those kind of past, people were just judging, don't have those kind of patience to listen to those who come from the minority groups. We will feel like, oh, they are lying. They are just blaming others. But I think what we have to do is like first to know about the history. And it's not just, but I mean, the factual parts of the history is not enough. We also have to listen to the emotional parts of the history, which is those kind of personal stories from the minority groups. But also we have to listen to the majority groups as well, because I think both sides, they have those kind of fears and those kind of pain or sufferings. And we have to share those kind of stories, not just, oh, you are victim, oh, you are perpetrators. And we have to listen to the victims always, which will make the victims as heroes. And I think it's not good for the victim themselves, and it's also not good for promoting the restoration kind of processes. We need to have those kind of space, to work together and to listen to the people and to be as human beings who says no strangers.
While kind of having these identities as victim and offender or as majority minority groups, maintaining those, but at the same time coming into a shared space for having a conversation.
Yeah. Actually, I've learned a lot from Tommy. I've had some kind of frequent dialogues or talks with Tommy, and because he's doing some kind of works about how to, get people to realize that their body was remembering those kind of biases, and how to help people to face those kind of painful history, and then without destroying themselves, and then to get back and work together for getting rid of those biases that we inherited.
You mentioned the phrase without destroying themselves, which I'm curious about because I think these types of conversations and this learning about historical trauma and these conflicts can be very tiring or very emotionally exhausting. And so I'm wondering, as a researcher who's looking at in some ways, very dark histories, very painful histories, I wonder how do you take care of yourself, or how do you maintain a sense of wellness and not destroy yourself, so to speak, as you are doing this research? How do you do that?
Last year, I was spending a lot of time doing research on the Hiroshima parts. And when I see those kind of pictures, I was very much traumatized. And those kind of pictures, and also watching some kind of movies about both Hiroshima and Nanjing, I was those kind of, facts all comes into my dreams, and I just cannot sleep well. But like for me, yes, we have a lot of dark histories, but also we have those kind of positive sides of the history. I think we need to, balancing those two parts. Like what I saw from those kind of historical documents that I'm reading, there's one program which names Healing the Wounds of Nanjing. And there they only focus on Nanjing, which is the dark history between China and Japan. And most of the participants, they were so traumatized, especially those come from Japan, those who comes from the perpetrators' sides. They are so traumatized and they don't know how to transform. And like this became the major reason that the program was stopped. And I think, what if we had both, the dark history and the positive parts of the history together put into the program? Maybe it will help a little bit. And for the positive parts of the history, what I mean is we have shared a lot of in commons, not only in history, but also in cultural parts. And we can use those kind of cultural factors like calligraphies or doing some kind of martial arts, and through those kind of processes, approaches, which is connected to our body and mind and heart, and it will help a little bit for those who participated. And I think this is kind of the processes that Tommy are working on, and he was mainly towards those who come from the perpetrator sides. So I think it will help.
It seems kind of like you're saying, using like martial arts, for example, like something that makes us use our bodies and be aware of our bodies to kind of help become aware of that trauma, or calligraphy, something that we can do together that we share in common. Like, using these little things that help repair some of that broken relationship, like you mentioned. So I know you are doing a lot of research these days, and like we mentioned before, you're living abroad in Japan, and you've mentioned several of these people who you're getting to talk with, Professor Liu Chang and Tommy and all these people. And you're in a period where you're learning a lot from so many different angles and sources. So I'm wondering if you could summarize your journey, because you and I have had similar journeys of, I think we've both lived abroad for about the same period of time, about 5 or 6 years. So if you kind of summarized your journey over that past 5 or 6 years, what would you say to describe it?
I think I grew up.
Grow up. I like it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like it.
I was able to face, especially those parts of the conflicting parts of myself
Mm,
and also the conflicting parts of the society. Though I've not made a lot of contributions to the society, but I myself was able to having different views towards not just the domestic issues, but also the international issues.
mm.
So yeah, I really grew up.
I would agree. Yeah, I would say that my experience has been the same. Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about in your research or in stuff that you're doing these days that you think would be good to share?
One point is about the peace building in the region. I mean, the Northeast Asia. Most of the programs, even the NARPI one, they are all like kind of conducting in English, which I understand, which is the very common language that we
Hmm.
shared.
Hmm.
But I'm also thinking about what if we can use the language learning as a peace approach, to bring us together. What I mean is not to, get rid of English, but also, to having a different, language which is used in the region, like Chinese, Japanese, and then Koreans. As you mentioned, you told about me, like if you can speak Chinese, Japanese, it's not difficult for you to, to learn Koreans.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I believe we have a lot of, common kind of stuffs, even in the language, also in the culture. And through those kind of learning processes, we can get those kind of togetherness or closeness, which can also be contributed to peace building. And another thing is like the presence of the United States in the region, like especially the military bases like in Japan, Korea,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to watch over China is kind of awkward. And
Yeah.
also considering the current tensions between these two, the United States and China, I was just like, I just have those kind of thoughts like, whatever happens, those who come from the grassroots, we have to stay strong and stay together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope your research goes well, and I hope to get to read it when you're finished and also join any workshops or anything that you're going to organize in the future. I'm looking forward to see what kind of activities you get up to. It's been a pleasure getting to hear the stuff that you're up to and hear your story. So thank you for coming on the podcast, Deting.
Thanks for inviting me.
So that was a bit about Deting's research and personal story. I hope you learned something new or gained a new perspective on something old. As I mentioned in the first episode, I don't want to offer a definition of peace for this podcast, but rather I want the stories, insights, and experiences of the guests to unravel into a creative, complex, and compassionate portrait of what peace in this region might look like. I hope this conversation with Deting offered you a perspective on that portrait of peace. That's all I have for you today. I appreciate your listening, and I'll talk to you next time with another guest sharing about the ways they're working and learning towards peace in Northeast Asia.